Welcome to Wagons West on Thursday, May the 30th. And once again, Facebook has given us trouble. It looks like I have it on my personal profile rather than my page, so you can go over there. Of course, we love you over here on X and Rumble, and we're also on YouTube and LinkedIn, so you can go check us out there if you would like. Tonight, I'm excited to have my guests on, Tanner Hnidey and Nicole Kimpton. All of us are dealing with the Alberta weather today, whether it be wind or thunder or a combination of both. And so we hope that we go through the stream uninterrupted, but you never know. So let's just see how it goes. At any rate, we have Nicole. She's trying to connect right now. Again, as I said, we have some weather issues. So I'm going to bring on Tanner. Tanner, sir, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today. Now, Tanner, I want to get into the meat of everything. But before we do, of course, the big news, breaking news of the day is the south of us is the Trump conviction. I just wanted to get kind of your opinion on that scenario and you know, maybe what you see as it goes forward.
Sure. That's a very good question. Pertaining to what's happening or what happened with Trump down south, I think it's an excellent demonstration of how the radical left uses law to engage in a sort of warfare against democracy. We're in a state right now where the legal colossus of laws in this country and in America and other countries around the world is so massive. That book of laws is so massive that if you search through it long enough, pretty much everything is illegal. Like, I think almost all of us could be arrested at any moment, at any given moment, not because we've committed some serious crime, but rather because this legal book of codes that we now are ruled by is so huge that you can twist words and search messages and search through meaningless conversations to create a situation where all men are guilty. So we know what Trudeau's poll numbers look like, and Trudeau knows what his poll numbers look like. Biden knows what his poll numbers look like. They know that they can't defeat in an election, a true election, any serious contender who stands for classical, socially conservative values that people want right now, because, of course, the pendulum has swayed too far one way. So instead of actually running against them, I have no doubt that we will continue to see, like we saw today, this engagement where these leaders, instead of running against combatants in an election, just disqualify them or try to do so. They disqualify them in this case, or trying to do so, by using law, by keeping them out of the race, saying that they're old-fashioned or they're not progressive enough to run in government or to hold office. And so it is, they won't have to beat those contenders in an election. They'll just not allow them to run. I'm sure that'll continue. It's happening more and more, and we have to work hard to fight against it. You know, if these courts cared half as much about actual crime as they did or do, you know, destroying Trump, you would see the abolition of crime in about a week. Right? If these courts cared half as much about, you know, putting in jail criminals who steal cars or murder or what have you, you would see a total reduction in crime in less than a month, right? If they cared half as much about actual crime as they do Trump and what Trump is doing and so on, it would be a totally different scenario. So that's, I think what's happening in America is also happening up here, and it's going to continue unless we stop it.
I just saw that today, actually, a little a snippet. I guess someone with a cell phone camera was recording some lady who basically stole a cop car in the States and ran over him, and she got acquitted. So people who are stealing cop cars and running over the police are getting acquitted, but Trump is getting convicted. So that's fun. Hi, Nicole. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Have you been keeping up with today's breaking news about the conviction of Trump down south in New York, I think it is?
Not today, actually. I was actually on a lake today in
oh, beautiful.
So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, that's what's going on. Our world is on fire. But as I mentioned in a post on X before we came on, you know, there's lots of trouble in the U.S., but here in Canada, we have our own problems to sort out. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight, is one of those things. Before we do, I would love for you guys just to give a little bit of an introduction about yourselves, who you are, kind of what brought you to where you are today, and what you're doing in regards to our topic tonight, which of course is financial freedom for the West, aka the proposed Alberta pension plan. I guess we'll start with you, Tanner, and I'll move to you, Nicole.
Sure. So my name is Tanner Hnidey, as you mentioned. I'm an economist. I'm an economist here in Alberta, and I graduated from university the year that the lockdowns started in 2020. So it meant, of course, I, like everyone else, wasn't able to procure a normal job. And it meant that I had to, work a bunch of side hustles during that time. Well, as I was doing so, I started a few social media pages in which I would comment on political matters of the day, using the economic knowledge that I had learned in university to try and demonstrate what was happening and why it was happening from that political economic perspective. And the Lord's blessed it. It's been so much fun. It's grown. The pages have grown, and it's allowed me to now travel across the country, or across the province, talking about these issues. Now, in particular, lately, I have been traveling with the Alberta First Pension Plan, although I'm separate from them officially. I've been traveling with them to a lot of meetings talking about the Alberta Pension Plan and the proposed benefits, comparing that between an APP and a CPP, and being able to meet with all of these individuals across the province. It's been a lot of fun, lots of fun.
Awesome. And Nicole, how about you?
My name is Nicole Kimpton. I'm a born and raised Albertan. Lived in Calgary almost my whole life. I was a nurse for a number of years, an LPN, and then I taught clinical education to upcoming LPNs. And around COVID, I kind of left and decided that I needed to stay home with my family a little bit more and participate with them. And then all this stuff sort of started to happen, and Alberta sort of set on fire, and we really need some separation from, I think, the federal government. So when the Alberta Pension Plan kind of came into proposal, we saw really firsthand that there was not a lot of information being included about what that might mean for Albertans. It was just, here, this is an idea. And so we thought that it was really important to educate people along what an Alberta pension plan might mean. So we started traveling around the province. We have had guests like Tanner Hnidey and Nadine Wellwood. She's been along with us a couple of times as well. And we started this project so that people could be aware of what it would mean to stay in the CPP, what it would mean to move from a CPP to an Alberta pension plan, and why it would be beneficial and why it might not be so beneficial to stay how we are right now. And so that's how this all came about, and it's been really fun and exciting, a great journey along the way.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember, Nicole, you were up here. When were you up in Valley View? Was it in March or February?
Yeah,
in March. Yeah. So I got to see you guys up here just across the street from me, so that was convenient. So that's fantastic. Now, I know there's a lot of hesitation, especially on the left, actually a lot of animosity on the left, and even hesitation on the right, politically speaking, when it comes to separating from the Canada pension plan and switching over to an Alberta pension plan. And I think people, they fear change. They certainly fear the unknown, and they're afraid to lose, what they think they put into it already. So I'm hoping that this interview tonight can maybe alleviate some of those concerns, maybe give people a little bit more comfort with the idea of financial autonomy from Ottawa. I guess I'll put it up to both you guys, and you can kind of do the heavy lifting. As I was mentioning to Tanner before we got on, I said I'm not quite illiterate when it comes to this topic, but I'm like kindergarten level understanding. So if you could explain it to me and the audience as if we were 5, because that's really helped my brain wrap around it. But what would be, just kind of, we can go to the weeds in a bit, but the broad strokes, what would you say are the main 3 or 5 kind of main differences between an Alberta pension plan and a Canada pension plan as it currently exists?
Sure. You want me to take that one, Nicole?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure, or at least I can start. So it's a good question. The whole question itself is framed quite well. To answer it, we should probably start very quickly by defining what the CPP is, the Canadian Pension Plan is, and how it works. So simply put, the Canadian Pension Plan is a labor pension plan. Actually, the Canadian Pension Plan defines itself as being a social insurance program. And that's probably the most accurate way to describe it. It works like this. You send money to the Canadian Pension Plan every year, and your employer also sends money to the Canadian Pension Plan every year. As a matter of fact, you and your employer send the same amount of money to the Canadian Pension Plan every year. Now, you do that for all of your working years. That is, it might be 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. However long you work is however long you send money to the Canadian Pension Plan. And then when you retire, you're no longer working, and decide to pull your Canadian Pension Plan, the CPP sends that money, or at least some of that money, back to you. They send that to you every month. That's the way the Canadian pension plan works.
Oh, we still have you there? Oh, we're frozen there. You got his handsome face stuck there in the middle. So, as I said, yeah, guys, we have rural Alberta issues, and it is what it is. But Nicole, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I'll take it until Tanner jumps back on here. I think a lot of fear comes around with the Canadian pension plan versus an Alberta pension plan. And like sort of to elaborate on what Tanner's saying, there's so much unknown. And so we have to know what we are talking about when we're talking about an Alberta pension plan versus a Canadian pension plan. And I think as citizens of Alberta and of Canada, there's a lot of things that we're not necessarily informed about. And so when we need to look at change, I think we have to have the facts for both sides before we can actually pick one and say that this is going to be the most beneficial. So when it comes to a Canadian pension plan, it's what we've known since 1966. It's been out since 1966, and we've not known any different other than the fact that, say, for example, Quebec hasn't been a part of the Canadian pension plan ever. And so there is definitely a province that's showing us that there is a potential that we could absolutely do this. And while we might not want to follow in the footsteps of how they've done their pension plan in Quebec, we could definitely take a step in improving it and doing something that's going to work really well for the benefit of all Albertans, our seniors especially, as well as our up and coming generations. So Tanner, I'll let you jump back on since you're back in the mix.
Oh, am I back? Okay, good. Sorry, I said we're in the middle of a thunderstorm here, and so it might be shoddy, the Wi-Fi. But at any rate, I didn't quite hear everything you said, but nevertheless, I'm sure what you talked about was Alberta's economic advantage that we have, along with the political consequences of a new pension plan. As I was saying before I cut out, as it stands, we send money to the CPP. Obviously, every province does, except for Quebec, like you mentioned, and our seniors receive money back. But Alberta has a demographic advantage compared to other provinces in the nation. That is, we're younger and we're wealthier, and we work more than other provinces in the nation. All that to say, what it means is we send a lot of money to the CPP. We don't get a lot of it back. We send a lot more money to the CPP than what our seniors receive back. So since the CPP started in the 60s to now, we have sent a net, when all is said and done, we've sent a net $60 billion to the Canadian pension plan. We've sent $60+ billion more into the CPP than what our seniors have received back. And that's before inflation. So you have to account for inflation, which increases that number. And it's also before accounting for opportunity cost, meaning what could we have done with that $60 billion if we had kept it here? We could have invested it, and we could now be in the hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars that we otherwise don't have. So this demographic advantage alone seems to speak to the need for Alberta to have its own pension plan. Right now, economically, the CPP does not make anywhere near as much sense for Albertans as an APP does. As a matter of fact, there's no contest at all. The advantages that would accrue with an APP economically, let alone politically, and I mean that from a position of autonomy, are vast. They're huge. They're massive. And finally, to your point about people worrying about losing the pension, again, that's a fair worry. It's a fair concern considering the cost of living today. But even in the CPP's Act, in the CPP Act Section 3, it lays out very clearly how a senior cannot lose his or her pension. An upcoming senior can't lose his or her pension. If a province wants to start its own pension plan, as we have the legal right to do, we must provide our citizens with a pension plan that is the same, if not better, than what we have right now. So the worries about losing one's pension or seeing it cut in half or in quarter, whatever it might be, while understandable, need not be concerns just because of the way the legislation is printed. So
I keep hearing, a handful of objections, and I hear the same objections everywhere. And one of those is a fear that they lose what they've already put into the CPC. If we jump ship and do an APP, do people who have already put in, as you said, Tanner, for their entire working lives, do they lose what they've put into it? Is there any way to kind of get a payout of the equal amount or thereabouts of what they've already put into the CPP if we jump ship to an APP?
Right. No, you don't lose it. Right. There is no concern about one losing one's pension or what you've put into the CPP. You know, as it stands right now, it's not as though the CPP provides individuals magnificent returns or juggernaut style or size returns. On the contrary, the average rate of return on an individual's contributions with the CPP, if you're born in, let's say, the 60s or later 50s, because those people are now collecting pension very soon, is about 3.5% ish. Like, the returns are anemic. They are not the heavy financial juggernauts we've been told that they are. And it's worse for people the younger you are. So I'm expecting a return, again, before inflation and before taxing the pension, which of course the pension checks are taxed. I'm expecting a return of 2.5%, which is brutal, right? Think about what I could have done with that money instead. I could have invested it and made a lot more than what the CPP is making for me as an individual right now. But nevertheless, is there a fear that you won't get back what you put into it? That is there a fear that you're not going to get the size of the check that you get right now? And the answer again is no. If you had your own APP, all that would happen is the CPP would take the assets it's accrued from Albertans, along with the liabilities, that is what it owes to Albertans, and just like switching from the right hand to the left, transfer it over to an APP. And the APP would continue to send out the checks. Now, the amounts might increase, of course, as a consequence of our advantages, but nevertheless, the checks would be sent out as they're being sent out right now. There isn't a concern. It's a good question, but no concern.
And Nicole, both of you guys touched on Quebec having its own pension plan, and it seems to be working out okay for them. So why would it not then work out for Alberta? Like, I think that Quebec does. I was just talking with Colin Krieger. He's the leader of the Maverick Party a couple of weeks ago, and we were just chatting a little bit about how Quebec does a lot of things right, and they certainly do a lot of things right by their own people. I'm sure we can have our complaints about them as well, but there's some lessons to be learned there. Can you guys touch on that a little bit? How Quebec has made a success of this?
Well, I think Quebec is very much about Quebec and having, and Tanner, you can fill me in if I miss anything, but I think Quebec really has an advantage where they're like, this is what we want to do. We want to improve the economic resources of Quebec and bring money home to Quebec. And so when they did the pension plan, while it might not be something that's gaining them a lot of funds for a pension per se, as in returns from investments, they're looking at building up their economy. And I think that the idea was really, really well thought through, but they didn't think through when their seniors now get to an age where they're no longer working and they still need people coming in, because they do have a population that is aging versus something where we're in Alberta, where our population sort of cycles through the young, and we always have the younger population working. And while we still have our seniors here, we still have that population working to help us pay for our seniors. So I think that's the thing that we could look at from Quebec's pension plan and say, hey, the model, while not completely effective, we can definitely learn from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think
sorry, go ahead.
Nicole's exactly right. I would maybe, if I were in charge of a pension plan, I'd maybe structure it differently than Quebec has, because Nicole's right. They don't maximize profit. That isn't their goal. Rather, their goal is to, at least in part, help spark Quebec industry. But nevertheless, I think it's a marvelous example of how a province can have its own pension plan and be successful with it. And two, it's an example of how Quebec understands the principle of autonomy, right? I think there are economic benefits to an APP, numerous economic benefits to an APP, absolutely. But there are also autonomous benefits. That is, it releases a lot of leverage that the federal bureaucracy holds over Alberta right now and returns it to Alberta. And that, to me, in itself is an advantage that we should exercise.
I think too, one of the other I know one of the other objections that I hear more from the left, like I think people kind of that are striped kind of more conservative on the political spectrum are a little bit more amenable to the idea, especially since it's being proposed by a conservative government. but there's various levels of distrust. And one of the things that you always see on these signs at these protests on the left is keep your hands off our CPP. And they think Danielle Smith and the UCP is going to be, doing a Scrooge McDuck, swimming in their dollars and buying themselves mansions and filling their pockets. And, I have, I think, a healthy level of distrust for all levels of government. But, my question is, what would, and I know the answer to this question myself, but for the audience out there, what would be the difference between a provincial government handling your money and a federal government handling your money, other than the fact that they're a bigger government with more problems and more a larger bureaucratic machine to run?
Well, I think it's really funny if you were to put it into a question to the public when they were asking, Danielle Smith is going to steal my money. Ask them which bank account she's going to put that in. And you can hear the ridiculous in the answer of, oh, would it be the ATB account or it would be the offshore account? It's not possible. Like it's laughable and ridiculous when you put it in that context. However, that is unfortunately how some of it is being spun. And so then they use those fear tactics. But if you were to take a step back and say, hey, wait a minute, let's not look at the fear. Let's actually look at the logic of this. We would know where our provincial government was spending that money. We don't want a provincial government having their hands in the pension plan. We want it completely separated from there. And what do we have right now with our pension plan in the federal government? What are they doing with our money? Who's appointing the people that are on the CPPIB board? And I'll let Tanner speak to that, because it's ridiculous to say, well, I don't want the government to steal my money, when in actual fact, we don't know that it's not happening right now. And at least if we're at home and we can have a pension plan and say, we don't want the provincial government being involved in this, we want it to be hands off and it's a board separate completely from the government, that's a better option for all of us.
Yeah, it's absurd. The idea that we would want the provincial government, any provincial government, managing this pension fund is absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. We can't allow government to, for one moment, plunge its hands, even a finger, into this pension fund, because the purpose of a pension fund and the purpose of government are two totally separate things. The purpose of a pension fund is to earn you money and to make sure the money is there for you when you retire. That's all. It's not to push a social agenda, and it's not to push a political agenda. Now, the purpose of government, on the other hand, is to rule over the jurisdiction that has been appointed to it to rule. That's what it's there for. So that means government, if it were allowed to manage a pension fund, might well take a few $1 million here or a few $1 million there and hand it out to a failing business, not in the name of earning a healthy return because the business is failing, but rather buying some political points and maintaining power for a little bit longer. If you invest in some business, that business might give you as a government a kickback and allow you to hold office for another term, or who knows what might have you. Of course, that's nonsense, right? We don't want that as economists and as financial planners and as people who would prefer to see a pension plan that is thriving and successful. It's clear that government has to be totally separate from it. Now, right now in the Canadian pension plan, like Nicole kind of brushed on there for a moment, we see, for example, Trudeau sitting down pension bosses, including the CPP's bosses, and saying, we want you to invest in Canadian infrastructure, invest more money into Canadian infrastructure. Now, the bosses did what they wanted. They'd said, you know what, Justin, we're going to actually invest the way we like to invest. But nevertheless, it shows how already there is at least attempted interference from the federal government on the part of how the CPP is supposed to invest its surplus, its money every year. Likewise, like Nicole brushed on again, Canadian pension plan investing board members are appointed by Freeland with consultation from the finance ministers from the provinces. That's who appoints the board members. Now, that is not for one moment independent of government, right? Quite the contrary. If Freeland has the ability to appoint and remove Canadian pension plan investing board members at her will, then clearly political interference is woven into the fabric of the CPPIB. So far from allowing government to control this pension plan, we want the opposite. We want to see less government involvement in it than there is right now with the CPP. The less government involved or involvement in the plan, the better. They have to be totally separate.
As an aside there, I know this is not directly on topic, but if you guys were to give Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland a to F score report card wise and on her handling of Canada's finances, CPP included. What letter score would you give her?
Well, it depends on what Freeland's goals are. If Freeland's goals are to foster an economically healthy country, then I give her an F, right? She's terrible at handling finances. The budget's a mess. Canada's a mess. Inflation is a mess. Money printing is a mess. Taxes are a mess, and so on and so on. Now, she doesn't, the CPP's finances are managed by the CPP and by the CPPIB. It is separate from the federal government. It's designed to be that way. But nevertheless, it doesn't take away from the fact that the finances of the country, if Freeland wants to see a healthy country, are being used. They're abused. Now, if Freeland's goal is to crush Canada, and if it's to destroy this nation we love, then I give her an A. She's doing a marvelous job, right? She's doing exactly what anyone else ought to do to completely crush and destroy a country so that it could be rebuilt in some hideously socialist image, right? So depends on depends on what vantage point you take, how you look at it. Yeah.
Now we do have a viewer comment here. You guys mentioned businesses being able to invest and do well. Yeah. Alberta, my home here says, I know your guests are probably going to mention this, but I know you guys are probably going to mention this, but businesses will save a lot of money by having lower matching pension contributions. This is seldom mentioned. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. So because of Alberta's demographic advantage, we can either cut contribution rates with our own APP and maintain pension checks where they are. Because remember, if the checks go down, we can't have the APP. Or we could maintain contribution rates as they are today and increase the pension checks for seniors. Now, it's up to Albertans to decide what they'd like. Maybe they'd take a hybrid approach or something. But nevertheless, if you decide to cut contribution rates, then not only are your individual contribution rates cut, but the business's contribution rates, which match the employees' contribution rates, are also cut. So let's just take a simple example, just for ease of mathematics. Let's suppose that an employee contributes $100 to the CPP every month. And his employer does the same, because that's the rule. So he contributes $100 and his employer contributes $100 to the CPP every month. Now you move to an APP. And because of our demographic advantage, an APP cuts contribution rates. And let's say it cuts them by 40%, which is a possibility. That's not an outrageous claim to make. So that means your contribution rates dollars are now only $60 a month, and the business as well is only $60 a month. Now, that's a lot of saving for one individual. But what about if you have a team of 10 individuals? That's $400, right? That's a lot of money. And on its own, that's a lot. But when you add in opportunity cost, you can invest that $400. You can use it for this or that or the other thing. You can expand your business faster. Who knows what it might be? The saving is so much larger than what initially meets the eye.
Yeah, even bumping up wages, right?
Yeah, of course. If that's what's desired, yes.
So what would you, I guess, as far as your understanding, what would you say the numbers are, as least proposed, kind of bigger picture? If we go to an Alberta pension plan, if we snapped our fingers and today we're in an APP, what would that look like numbers wise, maybe on a micro level for an independent business or individual, maybe then the business, and then what would it look like as a province as a whole?
Sure. You want to start, Nicole?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sure, I can. So there's a few different points to touch on. Firstly, the first change we would see is the asset pile. So the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board takes whatever money is left over after all seniors in the country have been paid every year, and it invests that leftover money. It's some few billions of dollars every year. Now, that investment over the last 25-ish years has been built up into this large investment pile, and it's about $600 billion large. Now, because Alberta has contributed to that pile, that is because Alberta's contributions were used to invest to therefore create that pile, Alberta is owed a share of that massive $600 billion pile. Now, the question is, how much is Alberta owed? LifeWorks says it's about $334 billion. Trevor Toombs says it's 120 or 130-ish, somewhere in there, billion dollars. It's some number. I myself tend to take the approach of 334. I think that number is accurate, but nevertheless, we're owed a lot of money. Let's suppose, just for the example, it is 334 billion. Okay, so that gets transferred to an Alberta pension plan. That can just sit there, that pile, and earn interest over the next how many years to increase its size dramatically, very quickly, because of the miracle of compound interest, which is a good thing. So that in itself is 1 point. Now, what about for the individual? Well, let's suppose that we decide to keep pension checks the same. Let's suppose we decide to not touch the size of pension checks, but rather keep them equal with what the Canadian pension plan was. Okay. Again, because Alberta has a demographic advantage, it allows us to dramatically reduce the contribution rates for Albertans, working Albertans in the province. It is not exaggeration to say that Albertans, individual Albertans, could save $1,000 every year in saved contribution rates. And of course, that's also true for the business. So you have an individual who is paying right now, let's say, just again, this is just for ease of example. Let's say it's 10 grand into the Canadian pension plan. That's just an easy number. Let's suppose it's 10 grand with a CPP. He goes to an APP. It's realistic that he drops from $10,000 in the contribution rate to $9,000. Now that's a big saving. $1,000 is a lot of money in this economy, but it's so much more money when you think what you could do with that $1,000. Each year you can invest it, and you invest $1,000 in the first year, in the second year, in the third year, in the fourth and fifth and 10th and 20th and 30th year, so that when you retire, you have at your disposal hundreds of thousands of dollars that wouldn't otherwise be available to you, that would have otherwise been used to feed that massive federal machine. So even just that alone demonstrates the benefit with an Alberta pension plan. You could, even if you wanted to, and I'm not saying you would do this, but theoretically you could give seniors a pretty substantial payout, so to say, this big asset pile, because the surplus with Alberta is so large, it's so massive that you could give seniors a lot of it back in a lump sum payment without damaging sustainability or security of the pension plan. Again, that's up to Albertans to decide, but nevertheless, the economic benefits are huge, massive.
Nicole, you're a mom, and when I hear numbers, I know you're just making up kind of round number of $10,000 a year. So, you know, if you're contributing $1,000 less a month or so, you said, $10,000 a year, you're saying? Yeah. So that's sure. It's $1,000 a month. That's a lot of money that can go towards groceries, that can go towards insurance payments, that can go towards, you know, and then if you're dealing with a 2-income household, that's even double that, right? So, you know, how do you think this benefits this families other than just your basic savings, Nicole?
I think it benefits families in a massive way. There's so much potential with an Alberta pension plan that, well, at the moment, we want to make sure that we're doing apples to apples in comparison. Alberta has so much potential that they could say, okay, hey, we are now making $9 billion in profit. And after the first 5 years, we could increase the contributions that we're giving to our seniors by almost double. That's a lot when you're considering the average income for a senior citizen is $758. And if a spouse were to pass and you still have kids that are going to university, like I look at myself, my kids, they'll be going to university when we retire, quote unquote. And that's a huge potential loss if we were to lose our CPP, if something unfortunately happened to one of either myself or my husband. So there's so many financial benefits that we could do for families. Your spousal, have it a spousal income or a spousal CPP or pension, so that when you're married, like there's just it's sort of the world is your oyster when you're thinking about the potential that Alberta has if we switched over from a Canadian pension to an Alberta pension. It's massive. It's absolutely massive.
While we're talking about families there, I know that we have a kind of an inverted pyramid in terms of our population structure, right? People are having fewer children these days than they were back when the CPP was created. Tanner, you mentioned that it's sinking. You expect maybe a 2% or 2.5% return there. on your CPP, how long is it realistically before it dwindles to nothing and there is no CPP for future generations?
Right. Well, this is a contentious question. So the way it works is like this. Right now, the CPP is a pay-as-you-go system, meaning as much as the CPP brings in, it sends out to seniors. So it brings in a lot of money, sends it out. Now, it brings in today more money than what it sends out to seniors. So if the CPP had absolutely no asset pile, if it had no reserves in its hiding places, then it could still today operate the pension because it brings in more money than what it sends out to seniors. Now, that won't be the case starting in 2026. In 2026, it seems to show that the Canadian pension plan is not, it seems to, it does show, the data does show that the CPP is going to bring in less than what it sends out to seniors. It's going to bring in less money than what it sends out to seniors in the form of pension checks. So if the CPP had no asset pile, if it had no reserves, then it wouldn't be able to fulfill its obligations. It'd be unable to do so because it'd be bringing in less money than what it sends out. This is called, in part, unfunded liability. That is, what is owed to seniors and how are we able to fund it? We can discuss it more later. So that problem is starting in 2026. But of course, the CPP still has to pay seniors, even though it's bringing in less than what it's paying out. It still has to meet those obligations. So what is it going to do? Well, starting in 2026, it's going to take its hand and reach into that big $600 billion pile of assets to make up the difference. So let's suppose that 1 year the CPP brings in $60 billion, okay? And it has to pay out $62 billion. So it's short $2 billion, but it still has to pay that to seniors. So what it does is go to that asset pile and it takes $2 billion, cashes it, and then sends it out to seniors. That way the difference is made up and everything is fine. All of that is, it's no worries whatsoever. The CPP says all of us are okay. Now, all right, I, like many others, are not particularly trusting of bureaucracy. I'm not as trusting as the actuaries might want us to be and so on. For example, I would like to see a lot more transparency with the Canadian pension plan's asset pile. I want to know if the asset is really worth what the CPP says that it's worth. You see, the CPP, when it invests in a lot of different holdings. It invests in the stock market, in public companies, and it also invests in something called private equity. Now, private equity is a funny one because it's a way to get rich fast, in essence. What it is, you take some money, go to a private equity company, they take that money from you and invest it, or actually buy businesses, flip them, and sell those businesses for a profit. So private equity, in essence, is. However, the concern comes with the fact that private equity investments are only valued by the private equity companies themselves, and that information isn't public. We don't know that the private equity valuations are accurate. So you might say, well, this company is worth $10 million, okay? But when you go to market to sell it, you discover no one's willing to pay more than $3 million for it, thus changing your asset pile size rather dramatically. So with regards to that, we want to make sure, I want to know that the CPP's asset pile really is what it says it is. There is nowhere near enough transparency with it. There is nowhere near enough guarantees to prove that it is what it is. And we need more transparency in government. More than that, when the CPP looks at sustainability, it takes a model and it says, okay, we have to look decades into the future. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and so on. We're looking far into the future. And to do so, we have to make a lot of assumptions about the future. We have to assume tax rates. We have to assume death rates. We have to assume birth rates. We have to assume inflation. We have to assume demographic changes, immigration, and so on and so on. All of these variables have to be taken into account when you're peering into the future to see what the future looks like. Now, if you change one of those variables even a little bit, you alter your prediction significantly because you're peering so far into the future. So right now the CPP says everything is sustainable, we're okay. But what if their model is wrong? What if their model is incorrect, as it's proven to be incorrect before? Inflation's a good example of that. Interest rate predictions are a good example of that, and so on and so on. It's not as though these models are dogma. It's not like they're gospel. They can be, and usually are, incorrect and wildly incorrect. Economists always say, we're predicting a so-and-so increase in inflation or a so-and-so increase in the job rate or unemployment rate. And we always discover that they're wrong because they're using these models trying to predict something which is impossible to predict. So your question's a good one, with a bit of a complicated answer. What I would prefer instead is to see Alberta have its own pension plan, increase the security over that plan compared to what we have right now, and increase transparency in the investments themselves, so that when we look at that asset pile, we can say we really know that it's worth what it says it's worth.
Do you think that it's their best guess, or do you think that it's active deception?
I would think it's active deception.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicole.
I would think it's active deception. I mean, you asked the one question there regarding family and how right now birth rates are on the decline. They are not on the rise. You look at things like MAID. We have people that are now able to choose out of living. So there's a little bit of active deception, I think, in my honest opinion, and it's definitely opinion. But there's no transparency on both the sides of what are the actual assets that the CPP has, but also how many people are aware of how much the liabilities of the CPP are. Very few people talk about it, and when we bring it up in our meetings, almost nobody knows that there are liabilities. And as anyone knows in accounting, you have to balance your checkbook. So there are always credits and debts, and those are not being exposed of or talked about. And it's just not, it's not aware, people are not aware of it because it's not being put out there.
So let's pretend for a second that the government is honest, trustworthy, forthright, good morals, all the things we love. They're noble people.
Yes.
Pretend, obviously. And, you know, politicians of whatever party they happen to be a part of, I don't, you know, they're a class all of their own. But let's just say they're the great people that we would love them and hope them to be. CPP invests in that asset pile, Tanner, you're talking about. Could not then theoretically, for the people that are afraid of losing their CPP or whatever the case is, could not the Alberta Pension Plan outright mimic that asset pile, invest in the same things? And as you said, with what, $60 billion a year more?
Yeah, a good question. You know, you could even use the Canadian Pension Plan Investing Board if you wanted to. Like if Alberta had its own pension plan and needed a pension manager, which it would, there's nothing that says it couldn't use the CPPIB and just have the CPPIB invest on Alberta's behalf. Now, I don't think that's the wisest course to take, but it is a course that Alberta could take. Alberta could also, if it wanted to, take those funds, that asset pile, and take the money that it earns every year, whatever's left over after paying out its seniors, about $3 billion-ish, $2.5–3 billion every year, and divvy it up amongst a variety of different private pension managers, and say, you invest, you invest, you invest, and you invest. And that way, if Group 3 has a bad year and does poorly, Groups 1, 2, and 4 will make up the difference and keep things stable. You could give those pension managers, you could give them a target and say, unless you earn 10% returns over 10 years or whatever it is, we're not going to keep investing with you. And so you'll lose a lot of money. So you better do your best, and so on. So that's another option. We could also form our own pension manager, just like the CPPIB, just call it APPIB, and give them the one principle of maximizing profit without incurring undue risk, and then let them invest as those board members who would have to possess expertise in finance, economics, investing, and so on do. And yeah, there are a lot of options available to us to create the most efficient and effective pension plan possible.
Obviously, as we've talked about, Alberta contributes a significant larger share than the other parts of Canada, and kind of get the short end of the stick when it gets sent back to us Albertans, there's a lot of Albertans that are on board for an Alberta pension plan, and there's the rest of Canada that would call us mean names like selfish or whatever for wanting it, because it's money out of their pockets. It lessens their share. How do we tackle that? How do we tackle, or do we tackle that? Do we just say, tough titties, kitty? Yes, Alberta should get its fair share, and if that means that you don't get Alberta's share, then so be it. You got to figure out yourselves. Like, for, I guess, people that are about a unified, solidarity within Canada, how would you address that to people outside of Alberta? Not that we don't really, I think, have to explain ourselves to them personally, but how would you tackle that?
Right. Go ahead, Nicole.
I think that if you think about when you are going to help someone, if it's CPR, if it's on an airplane, and the plane is going down, you have to make sure before you help someone that your surroundings, number one, are safe, that you're able to actually help them and keep yourself safe. Or if you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks drop down, you're going to have to breathe so that you can help your neighbor. Now, I know some people will argue with me and say that they're going to, put their neighbor's mask on first, and that's okay. But as a previous flight attendant and seeing and training in that actual atmosphere, you have to put your mask on first, because there will not be enough air for you to put someone else's on and then your own. And we have an opportunity here in Alberta to actually show the rest of Canada that, hey, you have resources. If we can do it, you can also do it. Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, like, there are so many places that have a lot of resources. You tell Quebec, oh, hey, no, you can't sell hydro anymore. They're going to tell you to go pound sand. Of course they're going to do their hydro. Alberta, we have our oil sands, we've got forestry, we have so much that we can offer, that we can build up our economy, and other provinces have just as much resources to help build up their own. So I think it's a model of, let's teach you how to fish again so that you can actually start surviving on your own.
Yeah, I'd agree with Nicole. Once upon a time, there lived a very great king. He was very massive, and his name was Ontario. And Ontario, this great king, like the old ancient kings, was carried around and traveled around by using 4 servants who held up his throne, with 2 poles. You know what I'm talking about, like a pallbearer, and they're in that almost that little box, that they'd sit on, kind of thing. And so here are these 4 servants, let's call them Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC and Manitoba, carrying around this great king. And then one day, Alberta hears that it can make a lot more money. He can make a lot more money for he and his family if he switches jobs. He doesn't need to carry around the king anymore. And so, of course, in the interest of his family, he decides to do so. Now, when he leaves, the king calls him selfish and calls him cruel and all of those things. But we have to ask ourselves, who's really being selfish? Is it the Alberta man who's going to provide for his family and to a larger capacity than what he otherwise could serving the king? Or is the king himself being selfish, demanding that Alberta, this man Alberta, stay in a lesser position, earning less money and not flourishing as much as he could for himself and his family by staying around and carrying him all over the place? I don't think it's selfish for Alberta to want its own pension plan. It's fair. It's just. We have a right to that money because it's not Ontario's money. It's not New Brunswick's money. It's our money. We only receive our tranche of it. We only receive our portion of it. We only receive the portion of investment income that came from our initial, surplus to the CPP. So far from being selfish, far from stepping on the necks of other provinces to have this pension plan, it's entirely just and fair. There is nothing selfish about it at all.
There's 2 points that you're reminding me of. One is I was a guest on a podcast just 2 nights ago, and I was talking about Ayn Rand. I've read her book. She's a little bit wordy, as you may know. So I've read her smaller one, which is called The Virtue of Selfishness. And to your point, Nicole, when you're talking about the oxygen masks, I actually brought that up on that podcast and just saying you need to be, or rather you can be in a better position to help those around you only when you're in a position of strength. If you're in a position of weakness, you're going to be no help to anyone around you, and you may even drag them down with you. Versus if you're in a position of strength and you're taken care of, then you can actually be of benefit to those around you. And you guys, you're just reminding me, Tanner, of a story. And forgive me, it's a bit of a long one. I'll try to make it short. There was a farmer, and he had this pig. And this pig had one wooden leg, just this little peg-leg pig. And this visitor comes to the farm and says to the farmer, "Say, farmer, why does the pig have that peg leg?" He says, "Oh, well, I was out tilling the fields and my tractor overturned and fell on me and was about to kill me. But the pig came along and lifted it up and saved my life." He says, "Wow, that's amazing. But did he lose the leg in the accident? What happened?" He said, "Well, after that, you see, my boy, he was down at the river fishing and he got swept into the river and he was drowning, and the pig jumped in and swam in and saved the boy. And, what an amazing pig." And he said, "Well, that doesn't really explain the leg." He goes, "Why does it have one leg?" He goes, "Well, you don't need a pig like that all at once." And that's kind of like what Alberta is, I think.
Yeah. Well, you talk about equalization payments too. If we were to ask people, hey, do you want to stop our equalization payments to the rest of Canada? Almost every single person says yes. But when you look at the CPP, that's actually what it is. It's not a pension plan. It's more of an equalization payment, and Alberta is paying into it. We're helping everybody else out, and we're not getting much in return.
What would be the process? So let's just say we get everybody on board. They're like, "Hey, APP, let's go." What is the process, or what are the steps to the process of actually getting an APP going? Do we have to contend with other provinces? Do we have to contend with the federal government? Can we just say we're going to do this and we do this? Does there need to be a provincial referendum? Can the government in power just sign a order on council and make it happen? How does this happen?
Well, officially, no, there doesn't need to be a referendum. Now, Danielle Smith has said she's going to hold a referendum, so she has to. If she doesn't, if she decides to release that promise, then it provides the opposition with a sufficient amount of ammunition to completely collapse the UCP's government. So there is going to be a referendum. But again, legally, there doesn't have to be. It is written in the CPP Act that a province can unilaterally leave the Canadian pension plan whenever it wants. It does not need the agreement of 7 out of 10 provinces or 2/3 of the population, the popular vote in the country. All that has to happen is the province one day says, we are announcing our intention to leave the Canadian pension plan. Now that triggers a 3-year process in which all of the infrastructure required for an Alberta pension plan, along with all of the negotiations that go into setting up an Alberta pension plan, are created and discussed. So you would see the creation of the actual APP. You would hire the necessary bureaucratic members to administer the APP. If you went with an APP-IB, you would set that up, create the board, and so on and so on. So that when the 3 years was up and all of the money had been transferred from the CPP to the APP, the actual transition would be seamless. The only difference that seniors would see on their pension payouts would be the name at the top of the check. It wouldn't say CPP anymore. It would say APP, and that's all. It's a very, even though the minute details, of course, of setting up a pension plan are complicated, the overall process is relatively simple. Declare your intention to leave, triggers a 3-year process where everything is worked out to oversimplify it, and then when that 3 years has expired, start operating the APP. That's all.
I've commented before on previous episodes when we're talking about equalization or the pension plan and such like this. We're coming up in 2025 to our federal election. And if you're to believe what the polls say, it looks like it's going to be an overwhelming conservative majority with Pierre Poilievre at the helm. And we know from Danielle Smith's campaign trail when she was campaigning to be leader of the UCP, when asked about her relationship with Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, that she has a good relationship with him. In fact, they used to work together as he's an Alberta boy originally, and they have that positive relationship. So on the conservative or even more dissident side of the population here in Alberta, there's a concern that, and I share this concern if I'm going to be completely transparent, that the relationship is such that he might be able to convince her to not go forward with that in exchange for whatever else he's going to give her. Maybe he'll give her the ability to make a pipeline or the ability to do something with resource revenue or something, because of course, Pierre's interests would be federally and not necessarily centered on Alberta, whereas our provincial government, I think, should have their interests centered around Alberta. What do you think about this? Do you think that this is a fair concern? Do you think that are there protections built in to stop this from happening? What do you guys make of this?
Go ahead, Tanner.
Sure. I think your point is a genuine one. You're quite right. Poilievre has federal interests at heart because he's a federal leader. He has to appease and appeal to the East if he wants to win power. If he only looks at Alberta and Alberta only, then he's not going to win the election, and so he won't gain a seat. And as far as he's concerned, all will be lost. Now, Conservatives in Alberta will vote for Poilievre whether he supports the pension plan or not. Right? Whether he supports an APP or doesn't support an APP. Now, he said he's not supporting it, but regardless, whether he supports it or not, Conservatives will still vote for Poilievre. So it's in his interest to, at least his self-interest, to not support an APP. Because by doing so, at the very least, he won't lose votes in the East. He might well lose them and probably would lose them if he said, I support an APP. The Eastern voters would say, I don't like that for 1 second. I'm not voting for you anymore. But if Poilievre instead says, I don't support an APP, then the probability that he loses those voters has been diminished substantially. So your concern is warranted. How would it look? Well, this is actually maybe more to Nicole's point and the, what was I going to say? The urgency with which the Alberta First Pension Plan wants to accomplish this goal. So maybe, Nicole, if you want to talk about just the speed at which you guys want to have the referendum and get this done.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tanner. We would absolutely love to have this referendum completed and done by the end of May, but obviously that's a very short time away. So our goal is a big feat. We have 90 days once we do start a petition to have 270,000 signatures. And these signatures are just to hold a referendum, but it's more than that. Like you said, there's an agenda for obviously Pierre Poilievre as well. He needs Alberta in the mix and running. And so I do believe that this pension must be switched over and a referendum had before the next federal election. And so we would like this to be done and completed by September, so that we can get that referendum started and going so that it happens before a federal election, because Alberta's voices need to be heard and people really need to have the awareness as to what's actually happening when it comes to a federal versus the provincial government. And like you said, TJ, we need to have a provincial government working for Alberta. That's their job. And it's time that we held them accountable to doing what is best for Albertans. And I do definitely think that a pension plan brought home to Alberta is in the best interest of all Albertans. And people might not see that at this point, but for a lot of people, change is hard. And sometimes the best thing comes with change. Sometimes you have to take a risk. And I think we need to jump in with both feet first and just jump.
Mr. Benjamin Franklin said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think it was Ben Franklin. I could be misquoting that. But we have in the fall, we have our provincial United Conservative Party annual general meeting. Is this an issue, the pension plan? When I say an ounce of prevention, so the pound of cure would be wait to see what happens with this. Pierre gets in 2025. Things happen or they don't based on the relationship. Can the party membership force the current provincial administration to follow through with this in the upcoming AGM?
Yeah, the AGM, the membership that travels to the AGM can vote for a policy if the policy is at first introduced to the AGM that says we want an Alberta pension plan. It can do so. But those policies are not binding. So even if the membership makes its wishes known, and I'm quite confident, overwhelmingly confident that UCP members do want this Alberta pension plan, it's not as though the government is beholden to, ram that pension plan through in the next session, right? It can ignore that. It can ignore that policy entirely, probably to its peril, but it can do so, or it can adopt it. So, my guess is a pension plan motion will be brought to the floor at the next AGM. I presume quite confidently that the UCP members will vote overwhelmingly in favor of it, and then it'll be up to the government, again, if a referendum hasn't been demanded by that time, to do with that information what it will.
Mm-hmm.
I remember on the campaign trail leadership campaign, I should say, back in 2022, an Alberta pension plan was on the table for conversation. It was one of the big campaign points from a lot of the leadership candidates, as was the Alberta Police Force or Alberta Police Service, depending on how aggressive you want to be with it, and a bunch of other things. And I remember one of the points was one of the things that people were talking about was Western separation, Alberta separation. Now, while an Alberta pension plan, Alberta Police Service don't necessarily mean that we're on our way to separation, those are the things that we would need to have in order to separate anyways. So I guess, what are you guys' opinions? And I know, again, this is slightly off topic here, but what is your opinion on the Western separation issue? And how do you think an Alberta, outside of the optics, I think the optics can say, oh, look, Danielle's just trying to steer us away. I don't think that's the case, but what do you think about this situation that we get a pension plan? We have now, I guess, municipal police forces happen. We have one that's starting in Grand Prairie. We have the ones in Edmonton and Calgary already has them. And there's other places that are going to start a municipal police force. We have, I think it's the Alberta Sheriffs. They're going to make some sort of Frankenstein provincial police service. So, I mean, I don't think that's leading towards separation. I think they were kind of leaning more towards what Quebec is doing, and they're still very much a part of Canada. I'd just like to get your opinions on this.
Go ahead, Nicole, you can start.
I think a lot of the more individuality that we can have, I think the more beneficial we can be. It's not that but federally, they don't have their hands in everything because they can't be in more than one place. It's kind of like when you're raising a child. You can do so much for them, but at some point you have to let them branch off and do their own thing so that they can gain an independence and an individuality. And I think with Alberta, it's the same thing, like you mentioned with Quebec. We have so many things that could make Canada flourish. And right now, Canada is not in the greatest economic status. So anything we can do to bring more economy back to Alberta to help the rest of Canada and show them, model them, I think it's so important. We have to start leading by example and not following because we're told to do something. Alberta has oil. Why are we not selling it? Because the federal government has said, no, don't sell it. That's crazy. We are in such an economic crisis. Why would the federal government say, don't do this? So in terms of separation, it's not that you're separating, it's just that you're becoming a little bit more individual. I don't think Danielle Smith is going for separation. I think she's trying to build her province to be more beneficial, more strong, economic, and bring in prosperity to Alberta. And that benefits Canadians in all ways. And you might think it doesn't, but it really does. Every province has that potential, and it's time we start modeling it.
Yeah, I'm in favor of Alberta's independence. The relationship between Canada and Alberta is broken, and the way you fix it is not by maintaining the status quo, what we've been doing lately, or what we've been doing for the last 100 years, because clearly that hasn't worked. Instead, what you do is work as neighbors work, right? It's healthy that there are walls there and boundaries between you and your neighbor. It's what keeps the both of you friendly, very friendly, and amicable towards each other. So something has to change. This pension plan guarantees Alberta much more autonomy than what it has now. The same is true of service, and the same is also true of taking control, which we can do legally, of, for example, EI, employment insurance and healthcare, which we already have control in some regard, although the federal government is trying to remove some of that, of course. Pensions and so on, EI and healthcare and pensions and what else we have? Police force and immigration. All of these things are guaranteed to Alberta. The ability to control them is guaranteed to Alberta under the Constitution. So it seems to me foolish and ridiculous that we wouldn't do so right now. Why not give Alberta more autonomy than what it has? Why not decrease the leverage that the federal government exercises over us right now by legally imposing these policies and controls, as is our right to do, and increase the quality of life in the province? To me, it's a no-brainer.
I see this as being made into a partisan issue, but I don't think it is. Like you said, it's making Alberta better. And regardless of what your political ideology may be, if you're in Alberta, it's going to make life better for you. What do you guys think or see as the major challenges or the major hurdles to overcome to get us to this place where we now have an Alberta pension plan and we see Alberta on the way up?
Fear-mongering. Yeah. The opposition uses the most ridiculous tactics and outrageous tactics to try and to scare people into staying in a program which does not maximize their quality of life. It's ridiculous and it's wrong, right? Like the left hates flourishing so much. The NDP hates to see people flourish so much that they would prefer to watch them suffer in poverty, or at least not earn as much money as they otherwise could, then they and stay in the current situation so that those NDP members could maintain their power, then they would see those people flourish in Alberta. It's immoral. It is so wrong. So what they're doing then, of course, as you know, is launching this campaign funded by unions and, of course, by the parties and so on themselves to try and scare everyone into the, again, absurd notion that your pensions are at risk, that your size of the size of your pensions would decrease, that we'd be worse off with an APP, and so on. All of the contentions are not contentions at all. They're not justified by fact or figure. The NDP and Liberals and so on prefer instead to appeal to emotions. I find it ridiculous, totally ridiculous, but effective, of course. Right? It's very effective to play on people's fear. So then our task is to make sure they're not afraid, to give them information and education so that they can see actually there is nothing to be afraid of here. This is a program that increases the quality of life for us.
And I think that's why we sort of started doing this, was because there hasn't been that much education around it. And so we're trying to decrease the amount of fear that's coming out there. From the NDP, from the Liberals, from people that think we're trying to steal their money. I think it's crazy that the NDP is now putting up signs to say hands off our CPP. It should be hands off of our money and let's actually earn the best interest for all of our citizens, not just for Albertans, but let's look at what's actually happening, and let's not be naive with our head in the sand and say, oh, this has come up where there's this fear mongering. Now we're going to believe what they say because they've created so much chaos and fear. It's like this tornado. But now when the dust settles, what happens if they're wrong? And they are, in my opinion. I believe that they're very wrong the way that they're doing this fear mongering. What happens then? And what if we miss our opportunity, which I really think that if we don't do this, if we don't move the pension home to Alberta, we're going to be in a lot more financial distress than people are in now. And when you think of how much people are struggling right now, that's a scary thought.
You're right. You're right. That is. And you're both right that they do use emotions, right? And I think people make decisions, and you learn this in sales marketing. People make their decisions based on emotions, and then they'll justify it with logic and reason after the fact, with that commitment and consistency, right? I raised the concern about of Danielle and Pierre Poilievre, but I think it's relevant to note that, as far as my understanding goes, that it still hasn't changed. The Alberta NDP is actually literally basically a branch of the federal NDP, unless they change that. There's some sort of hubbub about that when it comes to the leadership race right now. But is that not the case? The Alberta NDP is actually more or less a subsidiary of the federal NDP, and therefore doesn't necessarily have strictly Albertan interests in mind?
Yeah, that's what my understanding is. Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, I'm just going to put it out there to the audience. Feel free on whatever platform you are watching on to enter your questions into the comments, and I can give it to Tanner and Nicole. And while we're waiting for some of those questions to populate, Tanner and Nicole, is there other things that I haven't asked or haven't covered that you'd like to add? Because again, kindergartner, preschooler here, and if there's anything that you think is relevant, the audience should know or would like to know, then please do say so.
I think the only thing for me, and Tanner and I talk about this one a lot when we're at our meetings and such, is just the spousal benefits if someone passes away and dies. I think that that's a huge thing that a lot of people aren't aware of. You know, they're ready to get their CPP, and if somebody, say your spouse passes away at 68, that pension is gone per se. You would get a very minimal amount depending on how much you yourself are collecting, because we do have maximums individually. And so you get a death benefit that's taxed, and you end up either losing a pension that would have been an income for you and your family, or you and your spouse to survive on, and then you don't have that anymore.
Yeah, I think Nicole's exactly right. That would be the only point that I would add too, that the current widow or widower's pension from the CPP is abysmal, and we should change it, because it's not fair that a man should contribute all his life to the CPP and contribute a lot of money, like, you know, between him and his employer. Yeah, right now it is. If he makes maximums, it is close to $10,000 a year. It's close, if not 10 grand. It's right around that area if he contributes maximums. To do that for 30 years and then pass away young, and to give your spouse a very minimal portion of what you would have earned is that's not right as far as I'm concerned. And we should change it. We should update it. We should upgrade it so that it's more equitable in an Alberta pension plan, without a doubt.
Excellent. Alberta My Home up on Rumble. Yes, the inheritability issue is huge. If people want to reach out to get more information, or like you said, you're doing kind of tours around the province and doing live events as well. If people want to reach out to you, get a hold of you to either come to their town, to hold the town hall of this sort, or to come maybe on a show like this, how do they reach out and how do they get a hold of you?
They can, if they are trying to get a hold of myself, and I bring Tanner along. He comes to a lot of our meetings with us. The albertafirstpension.ca is our website. And you can throw out my email address in there, which is albertafirstpension@gmail.com, and my phone number as well. I have sort of it's a 24-hour cycle. I might not always answer, but I definitely check it on the regular.
albertafirstpension@gmail.com, you said?
Yeah.
Make sure I got my spelling right.
And one of the things that we're doing there right now as well is when you do go to the website albertafirstpension.ca, you can join us right away, so that when we do initiate an actual petition for that 90 days, we will have door knockers that are going to come out, and we will come to you, because we have a very short period of time. So we're attempting to get as many people to sign up on our website as possible, so that we can hit that 270,000. And when we go door knocking, we are hitting the ground running, and we can have it done in a very short period of time, so that we can get that referendum to happen.
Awesome. Tanner, do you have anything to add to that?
No, actually, I think Nicole hit it square on the head, to be honest. She's her and Mitch have been spearheading this entire campaign. I just show up and smile at these events. That's about the extent of my fulfillment or my involvement. It's been a lot of fun, but nevertheless, I think she's dead on the mark. Yeah.
Perfect. I appreciate you guys giving us the time today and coming on to explain the benefits of an Alberta pension plan, dispelling some of the rumors or fears about leaving the Canada pension plan. And again, I really appreciate your time. If anybody does want to get a hold of Tanner, Nicole, or Mitch, or anyone else with the Alberta pension plan, please do go to albertafirstpension.ca or email them at albertafirstpension@gmail.com. The information there is up on the screen right now. And then thank you for tuning in again tonight on Wagons West. We're here every Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern, if you're watching from over in Ontario or elsewhere, and live every Thursday. So appreciate you guys. Appreciate you coming on tonight, and you guys have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, guys, we are